Welcome into Falcons Today by Chat Sports. I am your host, Matthew Peterson, and on today's show, we're going to have some fun with the offseason. It is here, of course, and we're going to run through a 5-step plan. No, not to lose weight, but to have the perfect offseason for the Atlanta Falcons. So, looking ahead at the offseason, the Falcons are projected to have a good amount of cap room. $75.4 million in cap space. That's the projection. So that maybe after some cuts and whatnot, or restructuring contracts and all that good stuff. Now, Atlanta currently holds the number 8 pick, so another year picking in the top 10. So some good ammunition right there. Now, the big question mark, though, is what are they going to do at quarterback, right? How much faith or belief is there in Desmond Ridder, or might they look to, go a different direction at quarterback in the draft? We'll talk about that later on. Now, my first prong of a perfect or an ideal offseason for the Falcons is hiring Brian Flores as their defensive coordinator. They're still looking for their DC after Dean Pease retired, and I think Brian Flores would be the ideal hire, right? Brian Flores has a long list of very successful defensive stats for his teams he has coached. Now, the Falcons have made some interviews so far. DC interview requests, Brian Flores, Ryan Nielsen, Al Holcomb also recently got added. That's the Panthers interim DC. Jerry Gray and Ejiro Evero. Now, Evero got denied from the Broncos, but Jerry Gray is an interesting sleeper one because he overlapped with Arthur Smith in Tennessee. He was the Titans defensive coordinator about a decade ago right now. So might you see Jerry Gray kind of be the sleeper if Brian Flores does not come down to Atlanta? But I think Flores would be the ideal hire, right? He's got such a great defensive pedigree and background behind him. He was the Steelers defensive assistant and linebackers coach this year. From 2019 to 2021, he was the Dolphins head coach. So he ran a 3-4 defense, and this past season, Atlanta had a bit of a 3-4 hybrid front, only really using 2 down linemen, right? Just 2 traditional 3-point stance, hand in the grass kind of guys, and then 2 outside linebackers. So Flores, his defensive scheme, not very far away from that. And you pair that with his leadership and play calling, I think he would be the ideal hire for a Falcons defense that not long ago was looked at as blasted into the sun. It's the worst thing out there, and quietly played much better than I think people expected in 2022. You add Brian Flores to the mix, and this defense is going to be one of those defenses come like fantasy football drafts that maybe you're the Falcons friend who picks the Falcons defense because you're like, I don't know, Flores, AJ Terrell, Grady Jarrett, like there's some guys, there's some dudes, they can make some noise. But what about you? Do you think Brian Flores is the number 1 guy for the Falcons DC job? Let me know in the comment section below, yes or no, if you want Brian Flores to be Atlanta's DC in 2023. My second prong for an ideal offseason for Atlanta, it is franchise tag Kaleb McGary. So this is an interesting dilemma Atlanta is in. Go back a year ago, they decided to pick up the 5th-year option on Chris Lindstrom and not Kaleb McGary, which at the time made sense, right? McGary had 9 sacks allowed the previous season. This year, he was a top 5 tackle in football. That's always how it goes to. Ask the Raiders about it with Josh Jacobs. Now, a franchise tag is, by the way, in the neighborhood of $18.25 million. Had they picked up his 5th-year option, it would have cost them about $5 million less, closer to $12 to $13 million. If they let him go to free agency, he's probably going to get over $20 million. So a franchise tag would definitely be a bit more cost-effective than inking him to a 5-year deal. Now, like I said, Kaleb was awesome this season. You got to give him credit. He had a major turnaround. The former Washington Husky, 4th-ranked tackle in all of PFF. Top 5 guy, 91.6 run blocking. Overall grade of 86.6. He was one of the best people movers in football this year. You also get to kind of get the luxury of pushing off one of your needs, which is potentially finding a long-term right tackle opposite of Jake Matthews. Maybe that is McGary, right? Maybe you do want to sign him to a monstrous 5-year, I'm not quite sure, $80 to $90-ish million contract. Hard to estimate after, kind of a downish, kind of a poorish start to his career, but a really good 4th year. So you get to kind of push off that problem and make it like a future Terry Fontenot problem. So we're going to get to more off-season moves that I think Atlanta should make in just a second. But make sure you are subscribed for best Atlanta Falcons YouTube content. Hit that big red button, click onto it, and make sure you never miss out on any Falcons draft, free agency, trade buzz throughout the entire off-season. Today's show, by the way, also made possible by BetUS. I think I deserve some apologies for some people because I was here about a week ago saying, you know what? You can pay off your college tuition and all your loans if you put all the money you have on Cowboys -2.5 at BetUS. And look at me now. I am retiring tomorrow and moving to the Bahamas thanks to BetUS. Chatsports.com/BetFalcons. Use promo code Falcons125 and they'll give you a 125% deposit bonus. Let's move on to the third element of my ideal offseason. Use that cap space. There is nothing more frustrating for a fan base to watch their owner, and the Falcons have a phenomenal ownership group, right? Arthur is one of the best out there, but to see a team just put all their money in their pockets and not spend any drives people nuts. So there are some decent free agents out there. It's not a luxurious market, but I'd still like to see them do something other than sit on their hands. Jakobi Meyers is an interesting name. Kind of quietly put together a good 2022 season. 67 grabs, 804 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Atlanta's still looking for a wide receiver too, next to Drake London. Jakobi Meyers could be a nice, wine to pair with that. Another potential free agent signing, how about Deron Payne? Now, speaking of franchise tag, the Washington Commanders may very well use that on Payne, but if not, A.J. Terrell, Deron Payne, Grady Jarrett, that's a good defense. Like, that is a defense that maybe people don't really have on their radar going into the season, but they're going to play well. Deron Payne, 11.5 sacks. The former first-round pick out of Alabama is just sort of getting crowded out in Washington with all the other great talent they have, from Sweat to Allen to Chase Young and whatnot. But I think Deron Payne would be a really fun pickup for the Falcons. Now, another name, a familiar one too, is Jamel Dean. Kind of tighten up that secondary a little bit. We talked about it on yesterday's show, just Jalen Hawkins, Richie Grant. I like Hayward, I like Terrell, but adding a veteran like Jamel Dean in there, I think that could go a long way for Atlanta. What about this from the pass rushing side of things here? Samson Ebukam. He's with the 49ers, and he's sort of a rotational pass rusher. He's not an every down kind of guy, but he can come in on third down, obvious passing situations, and pop off for 5 sacks on a guy 5 sacks for a player who's not a traditional starter. Those are pretty good numbers right there. So I think Samson Ebukam could be a really fun acquisition for the Falcons on that front four. So with that being said, I want to get your input though. Who do you think the number one free agent target should be for Fontenot, right? If you were able to pick up the red line and it's answered in Flowery Branch, like, who do you want to get picked up in free agency for the Falcons? Let's move on to my fourth prong. This one's going to be interesting because I'm open to ideas, but it's prep Ridder to be the starter. Not saying Desmond Ridder is the guy. I think it is go into 2023 with the mindset that Desmond Ridder will be QB1 to start training camp. And if that's the case, give him the tools to get the best out of him to know if he could really be a long-term answer for you. He only played in 4 games, and he took his time throwing his first touchdown pass, but I do think we saw improvement from week to week. And that's really all you can ask for a quarterback in an offense that didn't have Kyle Pitts, that was missing London at times, if I remember correctly. You saw Tyler Algier pop off down the stretch here, but look at Desmond Ridder's progressions. From his first start down in the Big Easy, 97 yards, no touchdowns, to where he ended in week 18, 224 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, you can just see the quarterback rating alone get better every single week. So I think there's a good enough amount of evidence out there to at least be optimistic, right? I'm not saying Desmond Ridder is going to be the next Hall of Fame quarterback, the next Matty Ice, but I think the idea of moving into 2023 with him as your initial QB1, you want to draft someone, that's exciting too, but I think prep for him to be the starter. So with that in mind, what is your confidence level for Ridder in 2023? Scale it 1 to 10. Where are you at when it comes to Desmond Ridder? I think I'm at a solid 5.1, right? Just over the halfway mark, but I'm not going to get ahead of my skis and go, this is the next big thing for the Falcons. So put me in for a 5.1 after 4 games in 2022. My fifth and final prong of an ideal offseason is draft defense. I kind of been hinting at it all show long, but I would love to see this defense really get filled out. The 8th overall pick, in my opinion, should be one of 2 things. Use it on a defensive player, and also keep this in mind. With C.J. Stroud entering the draft and Bryce Young and Will Levis, you're going to have teams foaming at the mouth to move up and get these guys, right? If the Bears move back, you're going to have the Colts, the Texans, a handful of teams looking for QBs. What could that do? It might sound crazy, but what if a Jalen Carter or a Will Anderson or a Brian Brees start to slip a little bit, right? Because all the QBs are going, and all of a sudden Atlanta's there at 8, and Jalen Carter's still on the board at 6. I'm even game for a quick move up and keep him in state, have him relocate from Athens to Atlanta. So I think going defense at 8 would be a very fun move. If the big names are off the board at that point, I'm always in favor of trading back and stockpiling picks for the future. But that second round pick as well, just toss in the fire, get more defense. Here are some draft targets, though, for that 8th overall pick. Tyree Wilson, and kind of moving into the second round, too, because the draft is always a crapshoot this far out. Tyree Wilson, great edge rusher out of Lubbock, Texas. Miles Murphy, another good player for Clemson. Brian Brees, like I mentioned earlier, has dealt with some injuries on and off throughout his career, but he is a really good interior defensive lineman. Speaking of Athens, Kelee Ringo, AJ Terrell and Ringo. I like Hayward, but tell me that wouldn't be a really fun combination. Or Joey Porter Jr., the corner out of Penn State. He'll probably be, I think he'll go after Ringo, but if Ringo goes early, Joey Porter Jr. right there at 8, maybe if he falls to round 2 even, I doubt it, that could be a fun pick as well. When it comes to day 2 draft picks, though, in the 2nd and 3rd round, I think you target cornerback and wide receiver. I'm thinking wide receivers. I'm not going to be biased. I'm not going to go with my alma mater. JK, I totally am. What about Jalen Hyatt, right? The guy up in Knoxville who absolutely, sorry, Georgia fans, you guys get the last laugh, but torched the SEC this season. Went off for 5 touchdowns against Alabama. Jalen Hyatt, I think, would be a really good speed demon acquisition to this offense for Desmond Ridder. Him and Drake London, that'd be a fun 1-2 duo in terms of just overall speed and strong hands on the field. So that's my 5-step plan for a perfect offseason for Atlanta. If you had to give it a letter grade, what would you give it? A, B, C, D, or F? Let me know in the comments section below. And hey, if you love the Falcons, make sure to subscribe to Falcons Today by Chat Sports. We're going to keep you guys in the know all offseason long.